That evening, I walked through the door expecting nothing beyond the familiar rhythm of my routine, tossing my keys onto the counter, loosening my tie, and sinking into the couch for a brief moment before contemplating what to have for dinner. Yet, as soon as I stepped inside, an eerie sense of disquiet washed over me. There she was in the kitchen, arms crossed, her expression a puzzling mix that seemed devoid of warmth, neither anger nor sadness, but chilling detachment that I hadn't encountered before. "We need to talk," she said, and I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. That phrase had never heralded good news in our past. I took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for what was to come. "Okay," I replied, attempting to sound calm. She inhaled deeply, as if gathering her thoughts for a carefully crafted speech, then dropped the unexpected bombshell. "You need to earn my affection." For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze as I processed her words, struggling to make sense of the reality unfolding before me. "What?" I finally managed to ask, not from confusion, but disbelief. "You heard me," she reiterated, her voice unwavering. "I don't feel the same way I used to. I don't know if it's you or me, but something feels off. If you want my affection back, you have to earn it." It was as though she had just declared a new household rule, as straightforward as deciding who would take out the trash. I stood there, searching her face for any sign that this was a joke or some kind of test, but her expression remained resolute. "Earn it," I repeated, my voice edged with disbelief. "How am I supposed to do that?" "That's for you to figure out," she shrugged, almost nonchalantly. So, to summarize, I was supposed to interpret her vague desires, demonstrate my worth, and somehow rekindle her affection as if I were a contestant vying for her approval on a reality show. I opened my mouth to argue but caught myself. I needed to remain calm and think it through. Reacting with anger would only give her the upper hand. "Is that how you see me now?" I asked, my voice steady. "As someone who needs to compete for your attention?" She exhaled, a hint of irritation creeping into her demeanor. "I don't know, okay? All I know is that I don't feel the same way anymore, and I don't want to force it. I need something more." The emphasis on "I need" was telling. It was clear this was about her needs and feelings, her satisfaction. As I reflected on the countless sacrifices I had made for this relationship, the compromises, the moments when I sidelined my own desires for a benefit, I realized it was no longer sufficient. Now, I had to prove myself worthy of her affection. A shift occurred within me. Until that moment, I might have succumbed to the urge to win her back, but watching her expression, a mask of detachment, brought clarity. This wasn't merely a rough patch. It was a power play. She wanted me to chase her, to perceive her as a prize to be won. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I nodded slowly, feigning contemplation of her words, even as I recognized this conversation wasn't about mending our relationship. Initially, I noticed her comfort after laying down that ultimatum. She seemed unperturbed by my reaction, confident that I would follow her lead. That realization solidified my resolve not to comply with her expectations. In the following days, her comments began subtly, almost like testing the waters. "You used to surprise me more," she said one morning over coffee. I nodded but kept my responses minimal. That evening, while we sat on the couch, she scrolled through her phone, then sighed dramatically. "I just want to feel excited again, you know, like in the beginning." Still, I offered nothing. As time passed, her attempts grew bolder. She made casual comparisons to other men, as if they were part of a normal conversation. A co-worker of mine planned this incredible weekend getaway for his wife. "So romantic," she mentioned, and I recognized it as bait. She was fishing for a reaction. Another time, she spoke about a friend whose boyfriend always did little things to make her feel cherished. I refused to engage. The more I maintained my indifference, the more frustrated she became. Then came the real test. One evening, she dressed up for a girls' night out. This wasn't out of the ordinary, as she had gone out with her friend before, but this time, she lingered in front of the mirror, checking her appearance carefully, clearly wanted me to notice. As she walked past me to grab her purse, she hesitated. "I don't know what time I'll be back," she said casually, watching me closely. "I might stay out late." I took a sip of my drink and replied, "Have fun." I noticed a flicker of irritation in her eyes before she turned away. It became increasingly apparent that the situation wasn't about us or repairing our relationship. She was testing the extent of her control over me. The more I resisted her attempts to provoke a reaction, the more restless she became. Initially, I found it challenging to remain unresponsive. Every instinct urged me to confront her, demand explanations, and expose her manipulative tactics. But I understood that's precisely what she wanted, a confirmation that she retained control over me. So I gave her nothing. I redirected my focus to my work, frequented the gym, and even revisited hobbies I had neglected. At home, I was present but emotionally detached. I was neither cold nor hostile. I was simply indifferent. Gradually, the dynamics began to shift. At first, she seemed satisfied with the silence, as if the distance allowed her space to miss me. But as the days turned to weeks, my lack of pursuit began to chip away at her confidence. One night, while she was scrolling through her phone on the couch, she suddenly remarked, "You don't ask me about my day anymore." I shrugged. "You don't seem interested in sharing." Her frown revealed her surprise at my response. The test became increasingly blatant. She would brag about the fun she had on nights out, emphasizing her newfound freedom, while I remained indifferent. She began dressing up more often, even when there was nowhere special to go, lingering at the doorway, waiting for me to compliment her or acknowledge her beauty. But I wouldn't. That's when I recognized the panic in her demeanor. One evening, she returned home later than usual. I was in the kitchen, casually preparing a late dinner. She set her purse down with too much force, trying to draw my attention. "Did you even notice how late it is?" she asked, her tone sharper than before. I glanced at the clock. "Yeah." She crossed her arms, demanding, "And that doesn't bother you?" I took a bite of my food. "Should it?" In that moment, I witnessed a shift, the irritation in her eyes and the way her jaw clenched. This wasn't going according to her plans. She was losing control. She had thought she could manipulate me into competing for her affection, to prove my worth. But the instant I stopped playing her game, the power dynamic shifted entirely. She was no longer the prize. She was merely a person testing my boundaries, and I had resolved not to be tested any longer. Once she realized I wasn't playing along, everything began to change. Initially, she tried to ignore the shift, pretending my indifference didn't bother her, but I could see the cracks appearing in her facade. She started to notice my presence more, hesitating before leaving the house, as if expecting me to stop her, and becoming acutely aware of my absence, even when I was physically present. Then she attempted to reel me back in through small gestures, things she hadn't done in a long time. One morning, she made me coffee, something she used to do before our relationship soured. She placed a cup in front of me with a casual, "Here, made it how you like it." I thanked her and took a sip, returning to my activities without a significant reaction. A few days later, she suggested a movie night, her eyes watching me closely for my response. I agreed, but kept my enthusiasm muted. We watched the film together, but I didn't lean into her or take her hand. I remained passive, and she kept waiting for me to act as I once did, but I held my ground. That's when her frustration became undeniable. One evening, while we sat in the living room, she suddenly blurted out, "Do you even care anymore?" I looked up from my phone. "About what?" "About us," she said, crossing her arms. "You've been different." I leaned back in my chair, considering her words. "Different how?" She scoffed. "You know what I mean. You don't act like you used to. You don't even try anymore." I let her words linger before responding. Maybe because I realized I shouldn't have to. Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I paused, deliberately weighing my response as I examined her. The tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the edge of the couch. "It means," I finally said, "that I see things from a different perspective now." She opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it, seemingly at a loss for words. She wasn't accustomed to this version of me, the one who no longer felt the need to scramble to meet her expectations. It was evident that she was conflicted. A part of her wanted to maintain control, but another part began to grasp something unsettling. She was losing me. For the first time, I could see fear in her eyes. Not the fear of losing me, but the fear of losing the version of me that used to chase after her. That night, after our conversation in the living room, her desperation became increasingly apparent. While it wasn't outright begging, her pride wouldn't allow it. The shift was unmistakable. She began showering me with forced affection, random hugs, casual touches, and smiles that felt rehearsed. One evening, as I prepared for bed, she entered the room, hesitating in the doorway before sitting next to me on the edge of the mattress. "Can we talk?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. I set my phone down and nodded. "Sure." She looked down at her hands, searching for the right words. "I don't want things to be like this." "Like what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I feel like you're pulling away," she admitted, her vulnerability surfacing. I nodded slowly. "Maybe I am." She flinched at my honesty. "Why?" Taking a deep breath, I chose my words carefully. "Because I've finally come to terms with what's been happening, and I'm done playing along." Her expression shifted as she began to deny it, to argue, to twist the narrative, but I didn't give her that chance. "You put me in a position where I had to fight for something that should have been mutual," I continued. "You made me feel like I had to prove myself repeatedly just to receive the bare minimum from you, and I let it happen because I thought that's what love required." She shook her head, trying to deflect my words. "That's not what I meant to." "It doesn't matter what you meant," I interjected. "What matters is what you did. Now you're trying to change things because you realize I won't keep chasing you." Her frustration was palpable. "That's not fair." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Fair? Fair was me showing up for this marriage every single day while you kept moving the finish line." Silence enveloped the room. She fell quiet, and I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, watching as the weight of my words sank in. "Here's the reality," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "You wanted control. You wanted me to compete for your affection, to feel like I had to earn every little bit of love. For a long time, I did, but I'm done with that." Her face went pale, realization dawning upon her. "So that's it." I met her gaze, feeling an unexpected sense of clarity and peace for the first time throughout this ordeal. "That's it." She didn't attempt to stop me. I had braced myself for more resistance, perhaps even some desperate attempt to flip the situation back in her favor. But after I declared my decision, she merely sat there, staring at the floor, lost in thought, as if grappling with a reality she never anticipated. Maybe she believed I would relent at the last moment, that I would second-guess myself and convince myself she was worth fighting for. But the truth was, I had already fought enough, and now the only person I needed to fight for was myself. That night, I packed a bag. She didn't say anything as she watched me from the doorway. No anger, no pleas, just quiet disbelief, as if the realization had finally set in. I wasn't the one chasing anymore. Before I left, I paused at the door, glancing back at her one last time. There had been a time when I would have done anything to salvage our relationship, to cling to the remnants of what we once had. But now, all I felt was a wave of relief. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said softly. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. I walked out and didn't look back. The first few days felt strange, not painful or heartbreaking, just an unusual quiet. I expected to feel lost, as though I had abandoned something worth preserving, but instead, I felt lighter, as if I had finally set down a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. I dedicated time to myself, immersing myself in activities that genuinely brought me joy, revisiting hobbies I had neglected, reconnecting with friends I had allowed to drift away, and even savoring simple walks without feeling pressure to be somewhere or prove something. For the first time in a long while, I felt like my true self again. She reached out a few times, not directly asking for me to come back, but sending messages that clearly aimed to provoke a reaction. "Hope you're doing okay. I found one of your shirts here. Do you want to pick it up? And we should talk." I never responded, not out of anger or bitterness, but because I no longer felt the need to engage. The chapter was closed, and I had no desire to reread it. And that's the essence of moving on from something toxic. You don't miss the person. You miss the idea of what you thought it could have been. Once you accept that it was never truly yours to hold, the urge to cling diminishes. I wasn't bitter or resentful. I was simply free, and that sense of liberation was more than enough. Our story has reached its conclusion.